Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may not know, and this is your first time joining us, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. Create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. Find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. Mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs, and we know it. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping, we're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event, so please submit your questions for our speaker in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Again, none of what we could do here would be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and NZTE. We're humbled by their contributions. During these unique times, we are still curious on how sentiment is among these entrepreneurs that we work with. So we're going to start by taking a couple of polls to let us know how you're doing about your business, or how you're doing right now, and what you need support with. So first one, how are you feeling? 2021 is off to a relatively optimistic start. And also, what's keeping you up at night? Those answers help us not only understand where our entrepreneurs are, but also where they need help. So appreciate you guys giving us some of your input. Looks like they're coming in pretty quickly, so I'm gonna give it another second or so. Just sneak peek, optimism is in the lead. So I'm gonna end this in a moment. Thanks for your guys' poll results. I'm gonna end them, share these results with you guys. Optimism's on the rise, but surviving and anxiousness are also feelings that you're having, and that's totally understandable with the pandemic still at large. What's keeping you up at night? Finance? Well, hopefully our speaker today will help you all navigate those challenges you're having with finances. Now, without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in the chat to our special guest, Sedale Turbovsky, CEO and co-founder of OpenGrants. Sedale, happy to have you. Over to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Colin. Thanks for inviting me. Super excited to be here. Big shout out to ISIS as well, and the Entrepreneurial Center. Huge fans here at OpenGrants of what y'all are doing. We even had the pleasure of hosting some of your interns in the past, and yeah, really excited to chat with everyone today about grant funding and how you can use non-dilutive government grants as well as non-dilutive grants in general to help drive your company forward and hopefully help you solve some of those, maybe some of those finance solutions as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and jump into this discussion. We'll have Q&A at the end, and I know that lots of you sent in some questions as well, so thank you for that. So just to kind of get started and give an overview here, myself, I spent about 7 years building public funding strategies for people like Amazon, Toyota, worked on some incredible teams, and really was fascinated by the role that government can play when properly leveraged to build really unique and interesting things. We helped some startups leverage grant funding to then bring in some venture dollars to ultimately then become acquired. And government capital and those relationships played a huge role. One great example is, and you can check this out, the Port of San Diego's electrification project, which I think you could probably Google. We were able to help, some small innovative startups deploy their technology into this multi-stakeholder ecosystem, and ultimately lots of those startups were able to then sell their products. And it was a great way for them to de-risk and develop their technology, as well as build relationships and build validation around their product. So incredible opportunities in the grant funding space. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm a 4-time founder, so I really do enjoy doing this and sympathize deeply with everyone who's being kept up at night by their finances. And have one exit under my belt. Grew a couple other companies that didn't go quite as far, and now running OpenGrants, which is venture backed, and we're very excited to really help raise awareness first and foremost about what grants are. So a grant in itself is an award. They are non-dilutive, which means they don't take up space on your cap table. It's money you get. You don't have to give away part of your company for it. And they are also, you don't have to pay them back, which is pretty neat. So there's a lot of funding out there for startups, and it ranges anywhere from venture capital to debt, loans, traditional, you could use your credit cards. You can pretty much do anything you can imagine to get capital in for your company. And grants are a really great way for early stage companies to start developing a product, especially companies that are working on things that are technically very challenging, or maybe you're working on something that doesn't have a pure, capital returns and capitalist approach, but maybe there's some social impact you're working on. Maybe it's an impact driven company. Grants are an incredible tool to help you build those initial steps so you can start telling a more powerful story. The reason I'm super bullish on them is because while I think venture has an incredible role to play for accelerating startups, grants are a great way to develop your technology and get to the table with a VC where you have better terms, you have better chance of raising and success. So that makes the VCs more interested in investing in the first place. So they're a great tool for organizations to have access to capital to fund development and that early growth. So they're the best first check-in that I can think of. Grants are also a really cool partnership. Imagine being able to go to your investors or to your customers and say, hey, we do X, Y, and Z. And by the way, we're partnered with the federal government, or we're partnered with the Gates Foundation. Grants are a partnership. They're a really cool proof point, both for customer validation as well as investor validation, that you can do something, that you're executing, that you're delivering value. And so that's a really cool thing that a grant is. Above and beyond the money, they give you that validation that you can go and say to your customer, to your investor, hey, we're partnered with the Navy, we're partnered with the National Science Foundation. Of course, they're non-dilutive, and that's great. But really, they're also a sale. And so that's the kind of last thing is ultimately a grant results in a contractual relationship between you and someone else, and they are paying you to do stuff. And that's really cool. As an entrepreneur, there's nothing that gives you more confidence, right, than that first sale. The first time I ever convinced someone to write us a really big check for our software, I was like, over the moon. And that's the kind of validation, and that's the kind of oomph you're looking for as an early stage company. And so, lean into that. Grants are not just, hey, we got money to do a thing. There are all these other opportunities that are involved in grant funding. And finally, grants are also a really great forcing function. And I'll go into a bit more of why that is later on in the deck, in the presentation here. But basically, they force you to get your finances in order, to get really organized, to deliver some very clear thinking about what you're doing and what your value proposition is to the world, to your customers, to your investors. So they're a really great tool that helps you really get into that mindset of being very clear and concise. So it's a great forcing function. The question we get all the time is like, hey, how do I know if I'm qualified? Can I get a grant? And generally speaking, can startups use grants? Well, first and foremost, yes, 100%. Startups are funded with grant funding all the time. And one of our missions at OpenGrants is just to improve transparency about that and just raise awareness that, hey, there's this really cool capital source out there and you can access it. And it's called grants. And grants come in a bunch of different forms. There's federal grants, there's state grants, there's grants that special districts put out, which I won't go into, but basically a bunch of different government grants. And then there's foundation grants, there's corporate grants, there's all kinds of grant funding out there. And your first hurdle as a founder is figuring out how to get to it and how to get to it in the best way. And what that means is, sometimes you'll want to be the applicant. You want to be the person putting in the application on that grant and saying, hey, we want this money. But sometimes it makes more sense to let someone else do that. And you can come in and really just use the money. So being a subcontractor on a grant can be a really cool thing, especially for an early stage startup. because you don't need to have audited financials, and you don't need to have like a lot of those, kind of heavy administrative requirements that exist out there for grant funding. With a subcontract as a subawardee, you really just show up, do your work, and you get paid, which is pretty neat. It's a good deal. And then the other, bonus there is that you build a relationship with some, strategic partner. So what that might look like is, say you're building an electric vehicle, and you know that the Department of Energy is putting out a bunch of grant funding for electric vehicles, but maybe you decide to partner up with UPS, and they go get the grant, and then you just have to show up and deliver your electric vehicle. And not only then do you have a relationship with UPS, but you also have a relationship with the government, and your product is in production and deployed in a demonstration format, at least, with somebody very legitimate and big. So another classic execution of that partnering strategy is if you happen to be a university student. So if you happen to be at school and you're building some really cool tech, guess who the government loves giving money to? Universities. So you can get a lot more competitive by thinking in a broader sense about who really can use the grant money and how you can access it. And I'll talk a bit more about how you find those opportunities, how you build those partnerships, and how you access and understand where grant funding is and who's involved. So I'm going to skip through these case studies here and just get right into the meat of the matter here. So finding grants. Grants can be really hard to find. I will selfishly say that OpenGrants, which is our company, I think we've developed the best platform for finding grants, but there's a lot of different ways you can find grant funding. You can go to grants.gov. That has a lot of the federal grant funding that's out there. So lots of opportunities there. Not all of it, but it's there. You can go to the SBA websites and look for grants that way. You can go to the Seed Fund website, which is the NSF's SBIR, STTR programs. And then, the thing that I always tell people is just Google it. Google's great. Obviously, I think we all know how to use search engines, and Google is, probably a really great tool for anyone looking to navigate grant funding. The problem with it is it's not very concentrated, not very focused. So there's aggregators out there like OpenGrants or grants.gov, SBA. You can also go to BetaSam. And I can send some of these links along later. But BetaSam is another listing of a ton of federal assistance. They don't always have all the state programs, but they have a lot of federal opportunities there. So lots of different places to find grants. One thing to think through as you're looking is, if you're in a specific industry, often industry advocacy groups or, for like unions, other things like that, they'll have listings of grants. So, if you're working on a medical device, maybe look for, whatever the organizing body is around that kind of discipline, and see what kind of things they publish in terms of grant funding. And one of the reasons I recommend, a kind of a hybrid approach of leveraging your network and, search engines and other tools out there is because while there's a lot of places to find grants, the agencies typically don't do a great job of publishing it, and neither do the foundations for that matter. There's not a lot of really good information about grants generally available. And, short of using one of these specific tools or one of these specific places, it's kind of hard to track them down. And the other thing is, by the time they're published, frequently that's a little bit too late to know that they're there. You're going to want to know a little bit ahead of time because you're going to need to do some extra preparation. And so that's kind of, core of this presentation. A couple of things I wanted to get across is, one, how to find grants; two, how to prepare good grant applications; and three, how to build relationships with the agencies so that when funding is available and that you're well positioned to get that funding. So jumping into the first thing here, how to win grant funding. A pretty common story that we hear is like, oh, hey, we submitted like 3 or 4 SBIRs. We didn't hear back on any of them, or we submitted a grant, but then we didn't win and it was a lot of work. And so we never want to do it again. That happens, unfortunately, far too often. And so the first thing that I want to get across here is, and I'll just bring this up, is that the consulting team I worked on, we won 99% of everything we applied for. And that is not as impressive of a statistic as it sounds, but it's to get across the point that grant writing is both a science and an art. And there's a couple of really specific things you need to do in order to win grant funding. And the first one is simply following the rules. And I know that that sounds very simple, but once you've found your grant, you're going to see that it's come out, and typically what's called like an RFP or an um, uh, FAO, funding opportunity notice, or request for proposal. There's a bunch of different acronyms for it, but basically there's going to be a packet, and it's going to define all of the rules that you need to follow in order to be competitive and win that money. And the thing to know is, like, there's a lot of stuff in there. Sometimes it's 80 pages, and guess what? You got to read the whole thing, because if you don't, the problem is you're not going to follow all the rules and you're going to get disqualified. And the amount of times that I've seen people, legitimate, like perfectly large companies with big teams, get disqualified is pretty staggering. And what that means, if you're disqualified, is that you didn't follow the directions. Like, they didn't even get around to like reading your proposal. You submitted something that was either too long or had too many links in it, or for whatever reason, like you've used a weird font. There's a bunch of rules in these RFPs and you have to follow them. And it can be hard for teams that are moving fast, especially startups, to digest all that information. So you need to develop a practice of reading very closely what's in the RFP so that you can access that opportunity, and be competitive and be considered for funding. So that's the first rule, is follow the rules. Like, that's the first thing. And it sounds a lot, easier than it really is. So the big things that you want to look out for are um, the instructions around formatting, instructions around length, instructions around when things need to be submitted, how they need to be submitted, and especially the supporting documentation. You'd be surprised the amount of random forms you need to fill out. Maybe you wouldn't be if you've worked with the government, but there's a lot of really random forms you have to fill out in order to apply for funding. And the same thing can go for foundation funding, where there can be very specific rules, very specific things that you need to do. And if you don't read carefully through the whole application, you're going to miss something. Second point, and the other way to be really successful winning grant funding, is be a good partner. And this one has a lot more to unpack about it. But and this goes to one of the core things that I hope you'll all take away from the presentation today. And that is that you need to build relationships with these agencies. They may say that their process is open and competitive for anyone, and that's not really the truth. And it's not through a fault of their own. It's simply a function of human psychology and the tools they have in front of them. So basically, what they're doing is they're trying to deploy capital and achieve some goal, and they want to make sure that they're going to do it, and that they're not going to look foolish doing it, and that they're giving money to the right people. And they have this whole checklist, and unless you know that checklist, they're not going to really think that you're going to be a very good partner, and they're going to tend to give the money to people who've either received money before and done well, or people that they know, who they trust. So think of applying for a grant a lot like a sales relationship. Anyone who's done sales for any amount of time knows that you don't want to cold call people. Like, that's the worst, right? They don't convert very well. However, warm introductions, always fantastic. Selling to a friend, where you've already developed the relationship, always better. And that's what happens with grant funding. You want to build relationships. There's no rule against reaching out to people who run these programs, to people who are deploying grant money, and building a relationship. You want them to know who your company is and what you're doing and who you are as a founder, so that they feel comfortable partnering with you, because that's what it is, once again, is a partnership. And so some of the really basic ways to build those partnerships, starting with just reaching out. You should cold email them long before you want a grant from them, for example. Cold email, that's a great way. If they engage, awesome. Also, agencies will put out requests for information, and they'll also solicit comments on rules and other things they're publishing. So you want to be plugged into that ecosystem. There's the Federal Register is the central place for the federal government to do that. State agencies have their own vehicles for performing those things. So you want to make sure you're engaging. And if you're not engaging, make sure, someone on your team is engaging and doing the work to build those relationships. It's going to be key for your success. The amount of times that founders just cold drop in an application for a grant and expect to get it funded, it just boggles my mind. These folks are civil servants. They're there to work with you. They want to build a relationship with you. So go out there and do it. And there's a lot of resources to kind of help you navigate and figure out where's the best space. But, you know, a basic kind of practice might be, hey, go look for grants that are applicable to you. Look at what agency or what like department within an agency is funding that grant application, and then look up whoever runs that agency and build a relationship. You can use your local congressman as a way to, or congressperson as a way to reach out. That's a really great tool. Your local elected officials can help you, and they have a vested interest in you having a relationship with those agencies, because guess what? It looks good if there's businesses being built in their district and people getting jobs. So everyone's on board. It's just a process of understanding the incentives and aligning them all together. So those are the two kind of keys to being really successful in securing grant funding for your company. A little bit about our process here. So we are we're not necessarily the inventors of this, of course, but it's something that we've distilled over time from working with incredible consultants, incredible mentors. I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing teams across the nation, working on grant funding and building these projects. And you know, the first thing you need to do, as I was just talking about, is research, understand the motivations and the incentives behind the agency and what they're trying to build, because ultimately that's going to give you the strategic advantage as you're telling your story, as you're writing at this grant and putting this proposal together. Ultimately, you're going to need to understand what their incentives are so that you can make sure yours are aligned. On that same token, if you're going to be successful, don't try to shoehorn your agenda into incentives that aren't explicitly aligned with yours. So one of the worst mistakes I ever made as a founder was going after a grant that wasn't exactly what we were working on as a company. And it ended up costing us, you know, it was almost a $500,000 grant. We ended up spending probably 30% of that grant money on a consultancy that we had to bring in to do the rest of the grant, because it just wasn't what we were doing as a company. And there was a mismatch, and we went after it because the money was sort of aligned with what we were doing, and the agency was definitely aligned, which is why they gave us the funding. But at the end of the day, you know, there was a mismatch, and it was a problem. So just, you know, from my own personal experience and just generally speaking, don't try to like shoehorn something in. Find a good fit, because the government is involved in so many things. And then if you move past government grants into foundations, that, you know, there's so many people dedicated to so many different causes. Certainly you'll be able to find a match for yourself. So lean into that. Make sure you're embracing that opportunity. Sorry, I'm going to move out of the sun here a little bit. The second thing I already mentioned, just follow the rules. Be sure that you're doing the things you said you're going to do, not only in terms of the application itself, but also after you've received the funding, of course. And then this third one here, being very real. So be honest, of course, in what you're doing, but also be sure to use clear, concise language. Don't try to like write a proposal that's overly complex just for the sake of complexity. Frequently, your reviewers are not going to be as technically proficient as you are. Now, the exception for this is the SBIR funding programs, which is the Small Business Innovation Research programs. There, be as technical as you can be, because those are going to be very technical reviewers checking out your application. But, you know, with foundations and government and state agencies that aren't through the SBIR programs, you know, frequently it's a bureaucrat, it's a layperson who's going to be reading, it's a civil servant who's going to be reading your application. So use, you know, normal language, be as clear and concise as possible. And once again, make those human connections beforehand. And certainly if there's opportunities to submit questions about the application, which there frequently are, do that. Even if you don't have questions, submit questions that are well thought out and that make you come across as a thoughtful, you know, person who's going to execute well on your proposal. And, you know, I highly recommend, if you don't at least work with, you know, someone from the SBDC, you know, Small Business Development Centers, they offer free consulting around some of this stuff. Work with an expert who can help you kind of put that stuff together. And then finally, as I mentioned, you want to be a good partner. You want to be a partner to these people, because really, like, that's going to make a huge difference. That really is where a lot of this rests in terms of being successful, building those relationships, being a good partner. So just to touch on some of the FAQ, the frequently asked questions, before we go into Q&A. The first one that we get all the time, and people say this all the time, is, are grants free money? And just like, no, of course they're not free money. They are non-dilutive, and you don't have to pay them back, and that's very cool. But they're not free. There's a significant opportunity cost involved in applying for grant funding. And what that means is that you're going to have to spend time and potentially resources as well. So there can also be a capital cost involved if you pay a professional to write or consult on your application as you're developing that. So just be aware that it's the cheapest money that you can possibly find, and it certainly leaves a lot of great room on your cap table, but it's not free. It's going to take some time, energy, and effort to get that grant. So definitely, be sure that that's something that you're aware of because they're not free. The second question here, what about my IP? Comes up all the time. You're partnering with the government. There's contracts involved. There's visibility to different things you're developing. I'm not an attorney, so that's the first thing to know. This isn't legal advice. And my only advice here really is to have your attorney carefully review your contract. Something that I will say is that generally speaking, you're not under any obligation to do any work with an agency until you actually sign the contract. What that means is when you send in your grant application, that's just an application. If you get approved, that's great. But then there's a contracting process. So how it goes is we send in our application, it gets reviewed, it gets approved, there's an award made, and when the award's made, there's a contract signed. So until you get to that contract signing process, you don't really have to worry about it too much. Of course, don't go disclosing your confidential IP in your application itself. There's some very specific mechanisms through SBIR specifically to help you kind of manage this. And then in every other grant instance, it's not necessary. So how long will this take? Question we get all the time. And let me just throw this out there for all of you founders, especially who are like, ooh, I need like to raise $250,000 by the weekend. Grants are not that. Grants are really good strategic capital. They're great to leverage to help develop a project that's in your roadmap or help you jumpstart your research. But they can take, 6 to 8 months to get funding, best case scenario. A good rule of thumb, frankly, is a year in order from like application in to like getting capital. There's, of course, outliers and a whole spectrum of opportunity out there. For foundations, you'll typically see that, months is more common unless you're working with a big foundation, and then they might take as long as the government, like Gates Foundation, for example. So big spectrum out there. But what I can say is, if you need a bunch of money to like avoid missing payroll or something like that, best to like hit up your investors and say, hey, there's a thing, we need some more capital. Hopefully they've reserved some things to follow on. Maybe go pre-sell some things to customers, but grants are not like a rescue option typically. Now, I will bring up the caveat that with the pandemic and with everything that's happened in the nation over the last year, there are some really great grant programs out there. And I'm not talking about PPP loans because that's a loan, but there's some great grant programs out there to support founders and businesses. And so I encourage you to look out for those. And those can have a much quicker turnaround because of the pandemic and the emergency. So there are emergency grants, and that's a whole different kind of space. We do track it, but you're not going to be putting in a lengthy application either. It's a lot of like submitting past business information. So, and then the fourth question here, do you need to be a nonprofit? We get this one all the time. And I just want to say a couple things. If you are considering changing your tax ID just to go after some grant funding, definitely don't do that. Don't make a grant the reason that your corporate structure is anything but what it is. If you're thinking of strategically changing your corporate structure to drive impact or to like accomplish some strategic goal over time, then awesome, do that. But in terms of getting grant funding, you can always partner with people. There's other relationships you can build. Don't just change your tax structure because there's a grant on the table. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions because there's usually a lot. And then if there is some more time, I'm happy to dive in more to like the ins and outs of relationship building with government agencies, which I think is huge. And I really do want to talk about that more, but I'm going to happy to field some questions first.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sedale. That is an amazing overview. Really appreciate it. Got a lot of cool, great questions. For those of you putting them into the chat box, it's harder to navigate them. So if you could drop them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, we hopefully will be able to get to all of these. So we'll try our best. So Sedale, just to roll off the back of that last point you just made, there was a question earlier that I think you addressed, but just want to make sure I hit it. So you can apply for grants as a for-profit company.
Yes, 100%. And there's specific programs that like call it out, but basically in every RFP, you'll see, eligible entities is usually like the list title, and you'll see exactly who's eligible. And yeah, for-profits can frequently apply for grant funding.
Amazing. Let's see, you talked a little bit about IP and protecting it. Are grant applications publicly shared, or are they typically private?
Great question. So if you're sharing a grant, if you're applying for government grants, then they are public record, and they can be FOIA'd, and sometimes they're just like straight up published as a matter of course by the agency. So be aware of that.
Super helpful, yeah. How would you say the grant application process is, pardon me, is different for nonprofits compared to for-profits?
I mean, I don't know that there's a huge difference in the application process itself. There's definitely a difference in like how the incentives are aligned, right? So a nonprofit is frequently working on some sort of social impact. So the metrics are different. For some grants, right, the metrics are like job creation and businesses impacted, XYZ, very like economically focused. And, frequently for nonprofits, while there may be economic alignment as well, there's also usually like some social impact reporting. But overall, I'd say the application itself, they look very similar. There's a budget, there's a narrative, there's supporting documentation. It's very similar.
Amazing. And read the instructions, as you have said.
Yes.
So you addressed this a little bit, but I wanted to just address this question that came in. What do you do when the grant reviewer has little or no knowledge in your area?
That goes back to the point I made. You do as concise of a storytelling as possible. Unfortunately, you can't like. There's no well. There's frequently not a mechanism to like change who's reviewing the grant. There are within some very technical fields, but at that point you don't have to worry about the technical ability of the reviewer. So yeah, I mean, you really have to work with these folks. And this goes to my point really, and I keep repeating it, but I'll keep repeating it, is build relationships. If they trust you and know you, and as long as you followed the rules, then you're going to be in good shape.
Great. So somebody is asking, can you use a portion of the grant money to pay a consultancy to get the grant?
So generally speaking, no. In fact, there's like some federal law about that. But basically, you can't use grant money to pay for things that happened before the grant was awarded. So if a consultant is working for you, and let me just put this out there, there's a lot of people, especially in SBIR, but across the grant space, who will come to you and say, hey, we'll write your grant and we'll just take 2% or we'll take 10% or something. You should stay away from those people, because basically how they're running their business is they're writing a bunch of grants all the time, and they're just hoping a few of them hit. And so they're not spending any time doing any strategy work. They're not producing a very powerful or competitive document. And at the end of the day, you're probably not going to win, and you're going to waste your money, or at least waste your time. So stay away from those folks. Generally speaking, you want a consultant who's going to charge you up front, and that's just the fact of the matter.
Great. Let's see, question around, and feel free to pass on this one, but are grants in the same in Canada? How about Canadians, or can Canadians get a grant in the US, and is there a procedure around that?
Yeah, grant funding in Canada is awesome. It's much less paperwork. It goes a lot faster. I think, I mean, yes, someone from Canada, people from foreign countries get grants in the United States all the time. Once again, it's usually through a partnership, maybe through a university affiliation or a nonprofit affiliation. there's also grants specifically for foreign countries. So the United States maintains, robust foreign aid programs, USAID programs, that touch on everything from aid, as we traditionally might think about it, with like food and support for financial situations, to like economic development. So we fund, as a nation, our nation in the United States funds economic development in other countries, especially with strategic partners. So there's a huge opportunity there. So yeah, I mean, short answer is the Canadians do a great job with grants. You can get grants in the United States if you're from a foreign country.
Great. Question around, looked at so they looked up some federal grants and they require a DUNS number and other requirements. Do you need to have all the requirements completed, or can they be in process?
That depends on the program. So, and I'll just give you a couple quick examples. The SBIR program, you'll need your DUNS and SAM done before you can actually put an application in. And there's other programs like the DOE where you just need that stuff done by the time the application is awarded. It really depends. That's one of the follow the rules things. Just read the rules.
Great. Speaking of rules, you talked about the types of grant writers not to work with. So somebody's asking, how do you find a good grant writer and determine their qualifications?
Sure. So I will just put in another selfish plug here. OpenGrants curates an incredible marketplace of really great grant writers that you can select from. And generally speaking, a couple of the things you're going to want to ask them about is just what's their approach to being successful. You want to watch out for anyone who wants to get paid on spec instead of getting paid up front. So work with consultants who get paid up front. And then other than that, I would ask them what kind of relationships they have with the agencies. So a good writer who's working on something for you, and this is what we try to do is, we try to find, say you're working on a grant for Health and Human Services. We want to find a grant writer who's worked with Health and Human Services a bunch and like knows all the paperwork and logistics that goes into it. And so those are kind of the questions you want to ask is like, hey, what's your familiarity with the agencies? You can definitely ask for references. That's always a really good idea. Ask for, their thoughts on how to best navigate the agency, and ask them if they think you're going to be competitive and win. Asking a success metric from a grant writer, what I've found is that the really good grant writers, they're like, yeah, I win all the time. It's like 99% or upwards of 70% at the very least. And that's not because they're really good. It's because they're good at saying no. So a good grant writer is going to look at you and look at your project, and they're going to take a look at the company, and they're going to say, all right, well, you're not going to be competitive, but we can put this together still. Or they're going to say, hey, you're going to be really competitive. This is a great chance for you to win some grant money. Let's go for it. Those are the kind of conversations you should be having. It shouldn't be just like, oh, this is going to cost 20 grand and I'm going to do it and we're going to get it in on time. Like if they never have a conversation with you about how competitive you're going to be and what your chances are, and they can't give you a good answer, I wouldn't hire them personally.
Very helpful advice. Question here around the relationship building that you said you wanted to get back to. So no time like the present. Can you talk more about building relationships, warm intro versus cold calling?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, and central to our thesis at OpenGrants and just generally my view on this, is that, our civil servants are here for us. It's in the name, civil servant. They're here to serve you. And it's in everyone's interest that you be successful and navigate the program successfully, whatever the program is. And so, I think that frequently as entrepreneurs, and I had this my first go at this, we look at the government as this big monolith that charges us taxes and like makes us worried about like all these compliance things that we have to deal with as businesses. And the truth of the matter is that's an accurate representation, but there's another accurate representation, which is to say that there's a bunch of funding programs run by actual human beings whose whole job in life, like their whole thing is to serve you, the public. And so you should be reaching out to them, calling them, setting up a meeting in their office. That's a great way to start. Working with them, providing them value before they provide you value. Also a really good idea. So if they ask for like, and just to be clear, this is how it works. If you think that the government out there has some magic tool that helps them understand industry, I'm very sorry, but that's not how it works. What they do is they reach out to industry, and those are the people who end up getting the grants, just so you know. So if the agency is looking to fund bioenergy projects, they don't like have a tool that helps them understand the status of bioenergy technology. They reach out and they say, hey, what's hot in bioenergy right now? That's basically the ask. And they'll get a bunch of papers from a bunch of people in the space. And then guess what? When they issue grants to support development of bioenergy, guess who gets all those grants? Guess who gets the grant funding? It's the people who participated and helped them out. And it's also just because like that's the only people they know. So if they're doing outreach about their program, they probably just hit up that group and maybe hit up their listserv. So, you want to engage, figure out who is at the table alongside you, and figure out who's running the show on the government side. The quickest way to do it is just to Google around. So if you have an understanding like, hey, we're in vertical X, figure out what agencies work with that vertical and Google. It's all publicly available information. Their contact info is public. Reach out, be respectful, and respect the process. That's the other thing. They're not probably going to drop everything and meet with you right away, but they will have a meeting. Make sure to set it up, make sure to keep the appointment, and work with them.
That's great advice. Question around the RFP. What are the important points / areas to focus on?
I think the only area you can kind of ignore is the background, but even that's important. So unfortunately, you have to read the whole thing. And this is like comes down to why entrepreneurs get disqualified all the time, is that we all typically, and I do it myself. Do I get a new book? I skim through it. I love reading book summaries, so I don't have to read the whole book sometimes because I don't have a lot of time. And unfortunately, that's not how these work. There's nuances in the background in eligible applicants. There's nuances along the whole stretch of the RFP. And just to give you a clear example, I read an RFP yesterday that said, hey, one of the eligible applicants is a public-private partnership. I was like, what's that mean? So then I looked in the footnotes and it's like, as defined in CFR, blah, 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 blah. And so you may even have to like not only read the RFP, but you might have to go read the federal code to understand all of the things that are in the RFP. And I'm not saying that this is a good state of affairs. I'm just saying that it's the reality. So read the whole thing, follow the footnotes, like not, and when I say the whole thing, I mean the whole thing. Like you're going to want to chase down anything you don't understand, because that may potentially be a stumbling block. And it certainly is a strategic advantage if you understand it.
Totally. Yeah. I have seen very, very large grant applications get turned down for having even punctuation marks wrong on the first page.
Yep.
Read the deets. There's a lot of questions around how to locate grants for certain areas. Sustainability focused business, women owned businesses. Let's see what else. A coffee shop. So how can people find them?
The quickest answer that I can give you, and full transparency, I own and run OpenGrants, so I financially benefit from all kinds of things related to the company. But and I can say this with full confidence, we represent the only platform where you can sign up, create a profile, and get connected to grants based on what your company is doing. The second answer, so that's one way. Go to OpenGrants, create a profile, you'll get matched to some grant funding that's related to what you're working on. And that's a unique value that we bring to the industry, and it's free. I will say that probably the next best thing, this might be hard to find in certain spaces, but the next best thing to do is figure out like, do you have a local chamber? Do you have, is there like an industry advocacy group? I mentioned this earlier, and it can be very powerful. So, and some industries, of course, are better organized than others, but if you belong to a group or a chamber of commerce or something, they often have really good resources. And the reason they have really good resources, they may not always be up to date, but they have a lot of historical knowledge of what people have used in the past that's been really effective. And so it can help you weed through a lot of noise. And there's always new programs and new things out there. So they might not have a comprehensive list, and they might not have an active list, but they probably have a few good data points for you to reach out to and like latch in on. So that's my other suggestion. And then finally, I would say that, the SBDCs and the PTACs, which are both quasi-government, like government-funded groups to help you secure and build relationships with the government. They're great resources for this. So reach out to your local SBDC, reach out to your Procurement Technical Assistance Center. And both of those groups, they can't help you write grants, although they can help you write SBIR applications. But other grant programs, they can actually at least point you in the right direction, and they can help introduce you to agencies and help you build those relationships.
That's great advice. And there's, yeah, it's
And it's free. It's
yeah,
funded by the federal government. It's free for you. You pay taxes. Even if you don't pay taxes, you can go to the SBDC. You can get free consulting on everything from like fundraising, venture to grants to relationships. I had to throw that out there because people like, I don't know why they don't use it, but it's a great resource.
I used to work for one, and people thought we were the IRS and didn't want to help them often.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here's a question around the consulting. What's a typical amount, other than free from the SBDCs, but what's a typical amount charged by consultants to help with a grant application?
I can't speak for every market, but I can say that typically on our platform, it ranges anywhere from $100 an hour to like $380 an hour. A lot of that has to do with seniority, the ability to deliver on connections, and the market once again. So, Arkansas's consultants are a little bit cheaper than, San Francisco.
Great. Question around VC's impressions of public-private funding. So so public grants come with restrictions a lot sometimes. Can this be a barrier with some VC funders? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I'll just say that we're venture backed by Boost VC, and they love grant funding because it's non-dilutive, so it doesn't it doesn't do anything to their position on the cap table, and it helps founders, and it also is more money for the company, which means they're more likely to succeed instead of run out of cash. So most VCs love it. I think that where the objection occurs is not frequently, but sometimes you'll see founders and startups get like stuck in like research or grant land, where they become just a grant getting company instead of a commercial product. So I think it's important to consider how you are leveraging the grant in order to commercialize and grow the market and like get to market and maybe bring in more VC dollars. But I have never heard a VC say, "Oh, I don't think you should get a grant. That sounds terrible." Like, I haven't ever heard that. I'm sure maybe some VCs have uttered it, but I think it probably frequently comes from a point of ignorance on the subject matter instead of like a really informed decision. So while there are restrictions, all of those things, that's why you have attorneys. We have great attorneys. The company I exited, first company I exited was very much grant funded and then venture backed, and it was great. So yeah.
VCs love non-dilutive funding and not crowded cap tables.
Yep.
Let's see. Lots of great questions. Keep them coming, guys. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. Let's see. If we need to plan about 1 year to secure a grant, can you describe a typical schedule for what a startup should do, and what are the major milestones in this 1 year journey?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing is identifying the funding that you want to go after. The second thing would be like identifying the people who manage that money and start building a relationship with them. And then as you think about like, and so this is what I meant by a year. It's like to be very successful, you're probably going to need a year to execute on a plan to get that capital in. So you want to like build a relationship. You want to establish, and ideally provide them with some really insightful information about the industry, maybe, or whatever you have going on. And then you want to, of course, put in the time and energy to look at the application when it does come out, read it carefully, put together a thorough response. Ideally, maybe bring in some partners. You might need letters of support. There's a lot of kind of logistical things that go into that. So I'd say frequently you're looking at like 2 to 3 months to put together a really good competitive application. And then you're going to want to, you may want to, before that happens, in fact, you may want to strategize and like make sure you have the partners lined up ahead of time, even before the application comes out. Like you might know that, a certain program releases in April. So you make sure you got all your letters of support dialed in and committed. You don't necessarily have to have them written or signed, but committed before that. So once you put in the application, then it's just waiting. and that's all good. And then you're going to get to contracting, where you're going to need an attorney, and you're going to need to like review it and structure. You might need to make some adjustments to your auditing and accounting systems, those kinds of things. And then you're going to execute, once you get that grant. But it's not overly complex in terms of process. It just are things you need to do, and there's more nuance to it than anything else. Of like, all right, how do you really build a good relationship with an agency? Sometimes it's just as little as like making sure you're on their emailing list, and maybe they don't have a very competitive program. Other times it's like very competitive, and you need to be like hitting them up all the time and making sure they know your company's the best, and that you do really innovative things. So there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of variability, and that's one of the things that makes this so hard sometimes, is there's not like a single process that makes sense for every program. It's really different across, there's a whole spectrum of experience here.
Great. That's super helpful, Sedale. Speaking of competition, is there a source for knowing the typical acceptance rate for grants so they don't waste their time on highly competitive ones?
Well, I have two things to say to that. One is, generally speaking, no, because agencies are really bad at publishing data. You can kind of get it from them if you ask and build a relationship. So back to that relationship building thing. The other way is specifically with SBIR, which is one of the big popular startup programs. The SBA, if you just type in SBIR, program success or like reporting, they do publish. SBIR specifically publishes acceptance rates and a ton of other statistics about how many applications go in, how many got funded. There's lists of everyone who applied. All that data is open and on their website. So you can check out that data set. But for a lot of other programs, that information is not readily available. The other thing I'll say, though, is just because a program is competitive doesn't mean you don't want to apply if you're a good fit, and you will be competitive. So that's just a note there.
Super helpful. Question here, and I'm not sure if I understand, so maybe we'll ask him to follow up, but how do you find a good prime contractor when you just want to be a subcontractor on a grant application?
No, that's a good question. And so prime contractors typically refer to government contracting. In the grant space, it's often called like a lead applicant, but the concept is all the same. So it's a great question. Unfortunately, there's not a good way to find that. There's a few networks that have been developed. OpenGrants is building some tools to do that as well. But right now it's like, hey, who do you know? And how have you built relationships in your industry? Sometimes federal programs will publish teaming lists, so you can get an idea of who's there. The best advice I can give you is that you can request public records of everyone who attends like info sessions about grant programs. So some programs have an info session, and everyone who attends has to register, and it's a public record, so it's published, and it's usually easy to download. But if you can't download it, you can ask for it. And that will give you a list of everyone who's working on it. And so if, say you're working on, something in the medical space, and you see Pfizer is like going after it, maybe build a relationship with them instead, right? But yeah, there's not a really good tool. In California, the California Energy Commission has the Innovation Network, I believe is what it's called. It's like a social media site where you can they tried to build a tool that does this. They did a pretty good job. I definitely check that out. But yeah, at scale and for the federal government especially, there's not a lot.
It's good to know. Speaking along the same lines, do you have success metrics on women versus men? I believe that's with regards to applying and winning.
I do not. However, I can tell you is that the engagement is really garbage. And so there's a definite like disparity between how many women apply and men, like male-led companies, women-owned companies. I mean, it's fairly just reflective of sort of like the national issue that we struggle with in terms of diversity. So don't have any other metrics on that front though. So yeah.
Yep, can't boil the ocean in one day.
Yeah.
On the relationship front, how do you determine when there is a meeting to discuss the grant?
Typically that will be published with the RFP. So when the grant application comes out, there's usually a section in there about like meetings, and they'll have the dates published. If that's not there, typically they'll publish some kind of follow-up And usually in the RFP, if they haven't published the dates, there'll be a link so you can sign up for an email notification.
That's helpful. We're
Oh,
almost at time, and you're running on solar power. Let's
I
see.
am. Check it out.
So shout out to just so everyone knows, shout out to Sedale. He doesn't have power, and he cared so much about sharing this information with you guys. He's rolling off solar. So big shout out to you. Thanks so much, Sedale. I don't think we'll have any time to get to these last questions, but what are your final takeaways for the group today? What's the one thing or two things that you don't want anybody leaving without remembering?
The two big ones I would say is, one, if you are a founder looking at capital sources, definitely consider grants. They're a great resource. And second, build relationships with your civil servants. Like, I know that it sounds sort of boring, and I know that a lot of people have bad taste in their mouth from government experiences one way or another. Build relationships there. It's going to be really valuable for you, far and above like grant funding. I think that not enough entrepreneurs are involved in kind of helping shape economic policy and growth, and yet entrepreneurs are the key to our economic health. There's lots of really good data on that subject, and so I would just encourage you all, as founders, you play a really important role in moving our country forwards. You're going to play an important role in building the economy in a post-COVID kind of world, and you should be at the table. And if you're not at the table, the people who are at the table are going to get the money, so you might as well show up and participate. And if you have any questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Just search for Sedale Turbovsky. It's like the only name that's paired up that way, so you'll find me. And happy to connect and offer any other information I can. But yeah, thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Sedale. And thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar today. We're going to send out the links to, or we're going to send out the slides and a link to this recording in case you weren't able to join us for the entire time. Sedale, you're the man. We look forward to staying in touch and to learning from you soon. Everyone, check out OpenGrants. As he said, it's a free tool, and he's there to help. So we really appreciate everyone joining us today. Up next, we've got a couple of events coming up. On Friday, April 9th, we've got Entrepreneurial Leadership with Joel Peterson. And on Tuesday, April 13th, we've got The Best Brands Are Brave, Power of Storytelling with Beth Duane. So we hope you guys can join those ones. Thank you again, Sedale. You rock, and this is very, very informative. And we look forward to seeing everyone online soon. Thanks again for joining us.
All right, take care, everyone.